Retirement isn't about having enough money saved up. It's about the moment when the invisible contract between you and your employer expires, but nobody bothered to tell you the terms changed. Here's what I mean. I knew a guy named Frank who worked in quality control at a manufacturing plant outside Detroit for 37 years. Good salary, decent benefits, the whole package. He could have retired at 62 with full pension. Instead, he stayed until he was 68, 6 extra years. You know what he told me at his retirement party? I don't know why I waited, not I'm glad I stayed or the extra savings were worth it, just confusion about his own decision. 3 months after he retired, the company restructured his entire department. Everything he'd been maintaining for those last 6 years, gone, automated. Frank's story isn't special. It's the default setting for most people I know in our generation. We stay because we think we're supposed to, not because the math works out. And that's the problem I want to talk about. Because retirement readiness isn't really about your 401k balance or whether your mortgage is paid off. It's about recognizing when you've crossed an invisible threshold where continuing to work costs you more than it pays you. Not in dollar terms, in something way more expensive. So here's what I'm going to break down. I'm going to show you 10 signals that you've crossed that threshold. But more importantly, I'm going to explain the psychological systems that keep you from seeing these signals clearly, why the people around you benefit from your blindness, and how to actually think about the retirement decision without lying to yourself. Because that's what most retirement advice is, lies wrapped in optimism. Think of your work life like a subscription service. When you're 30, the value proposition is clear. You pay with your time and energy, you get back a salary, skills development, career progression, and social status. The trade makes sense. The subscription is worth it. But subscriptions have this funny property. They keep billing you the same amount every month, but the value you extract tends to decline over time. You stop using all the features, the product doesn't improve at the rate it used to, but you keep paying because canceling feels like a bigger decision than just letting it run. By the time you're 60, you're still paying the same price in hours and energy, probably more because your body doesn't recover like it used to. But what are you getting back? The salary is mostly flat. Skills development? You're not learning anything new. Career progression? There's nowhere left to go. Social status? Everyone knows you're just running out the clock. The value proposition flipped, but you kept the subscription active because nobody sits down and audits their subscriptions until something breaks. Here's the first sign that your subscription expired. You've stopped pretending the meetings matter. I don't mean you've stopped attending them. I mean, internally, you've stopped running the mental software that pretends these conversations will lead somewhere. Someone's talking about a new initiative, a process improvement, a strategic realignment, and inside your head, there's just silence. Not disagreement, not even cynicism, just nothing. This is different from burnout, by the way. Burnout is when you still care, but you're exhausted. This is when you don't care and you're not even exhausted about not caring. You're just done. The company hired a consulting firm in 2019 to research employee engagement. You want to know what they found? Workers over 55 who plan to retire in the next 5 years had a 73% decline in what they called strategic investment. That's corporate speak for they stopped giving a shit about where the company was going. But here's the kicker. Productivity didn't drop. These workers still did their jobs fine. They just stopped playing the bigger game. They clocked in, did the task, clocked out, and management didn't even notice because the output metrics held steady. This is the trap. You can coast for years in this state, and many people do. But every day you coast in this state, you're overpaying for a subscription that's delivering nothing but a paycheck. And the paycheck? That's the only feature left that works. Second sign, you've started doing math on random Tuesdays. You're sitting at your desk, you've got a spreadsheet open that has nothing to do with your job, and you're calculating how much money you'd have if you retired next month versus next year versus in 3 years. You're running scenarios. What if the market drops 15%? What if I work part-time? What if we downsize the house? This isn't planning. Planning is when you sit down once a quarter with intention and review your financial position. This is something else. This is your brain trying to solve a puzzle it's obsessed with. Why? Because on some level, you already know you're done. Your subconscious has logged off. But your conscious mind hasn't gotten the memo yet, so it keeps running these calculations trying to find permission to leave. I talked to a retirement psychologist, a woman who works with executives transitioning out of corporate life. She told me something that stuck with me. She said most people don't retire when they have enough money. They retire when they finally give themselves permission to believe they have enough money. And that permission doesn't come from hitting a number. It comes from a psychological shift where the identity of worker stops feeling like the most important thing about you. The math you're doing on Tuesdays, that's not financial planning. That's identity negotiation. You're trying to figure out if you're allowed to be someone other than your job title. Third sign, you've stopped caring about new technology at work. They rolled out a new software platform. It's supposed to make everything more efficient. You sat through the training. You nodded in the right places. And internally, you've decided you're going to use exactly 3 features of this system and ignore the other 47. You're not doing this to be difficult. You're doing it because learning new systems requires investment, and investment requires belief in future returns. If you're planning to be here for 10 more years, sure, invest the cognitive load to master the new system. But if you're trying to figure out how to leave in 18 months, your brain has already made the calculation. It's not worth it. Here's what's interesting about this signal. It reveals something about how humans process sunk cost versus future value. There's a study from 2012 out of University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School that tracked knowledge workers over 50. They found that learning engagement dropped 41% in workers within 3 years of planned retirement. But here's the surprising part. It dropped even more, 56%, in workers who hadn't yet decided to retire, but were financially able to. The researchers concluded that your brain starts detaching from work before you consciously decide to leave. The subscription is already canceled in your subconscious. You just haven't admitted it yet to your boss or your spouse or yourself. Now here's where this gets really interesting. Fourth sign, you're no longer afraid of being fired. I don't mean you're reckless or you're trying to get fired. I mean the low-level anxiety that used to exist about job security has just evaporated. You have a meeting with your boss and they're clearly annoyed about something you didn't do. And inside your head, instead of panic or defensiveness, there's just this calm thought. Okay, so fire me. You're not saying it out loud, you're not being confrontational, but the power dynamic has shifted. Because here's what happened. You've run the numbers enough times on enough Tuesdays that you know, actually, losing this job wouldn't be a catastrophe. It might even be a favor. They'd have to give you severance. You'd get unemployment. You'd start collecting your pension early. The life you've been trying to give yourself permission to start, getting fired would force you to start it. There's a concept in negotiation theory called BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's the option you have if the deal falls through. In employment, your BATNA is what happens if you lose the job. When you're 35 with a mortgage and 2 kids in daycare, your BATNA is pretty bad. Lose the job, you're in trouble. You have no leverage. Your employer knows it, you know it. The power imbalance is severe. But when you're 63 and you've got a pension and $400,000 in your 401k and your house is almost paid off, your BATNA is I retire slightly earlier than planned. That's not a bad outcome. That's barely a downside. And when your BATNA stops being scary, the entire emotional architecture of work collapses. You're not subordinate anymore. You're just a person trading time for money, and you're about ready to stop making that trade. Fifth sign, and this one's subtle, you've started noticing who already left. You're at work and someone mentions that Jim from accounting retired last year, and you think, wait, Jim's only 61? I'm 62. Or you run into an old colleague at the grocery store and she tells you she's been retired for 8 months and she looks genuinely happy, and you feel something that's half jealousy, half permission. Because here's what's happening. Humans are social proof machines. We decide what's normal by looking around at what everyone else is doing. For 40 years, the normal thing in your social environment was people work until 65 or later. But now, slowly, the normal thing in your immediate peer group is shifting. People are leaving at 60, at 62, some people at 58 if they've got good pensions. And every person who leaves successfully, who doesn't come crawling back, who seems fine, is proof that the old normal is updating. There's a tipping point in every social group. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this. Once about 15 to 20% of a peer group adopts a new behavior, it starts to feel inevitable instead of radical. I'd bet money that in your workplace right now, you're right at that tipping point. Enough people have retired that it's starting to feel less like quitting and more like the obvious next step. And that shift in framing is everything. Sixth sign, your body is sending you bills you can't ignore. I'm not talking about normal aging. I'm talking about the moment when you realize the job is actively extracting health you can't get back. Maybe it's your back. Maybe it's your blood pressure. Maybe it's just the cumulative sleep debt of 40 years of early alarms. But there's a specific feeling I'm describing. It's when you think, if I do this for 5 more years, I'm going to be too broken to enjoy retirement. That's the calculation that changes everything. Because now you're not comparing salary versus free time. You're comparing money versus functional years of life. And money is renewable. You can always make more money, even in retirement, if you want to. But you can't buy back your knees. You can't buy back your cardiovascular health. You can't buy back the cognitive sharpness you lose to chronic stress. I know a guy who drove long-haul trucks for 31 years. He was planning to work until 65 to maximize his pension. At 61, his doctor told him he had high blood pressure, early-stage diabetes, and if he didn't change his lifestyle, he was looking at a heart attack before 70. You know what he did? He retired at 62, took a slightly smaller pension, started walking every morning, lost 40 pounds, and last I heard, he's healthier now than he was at 55. He told me, I was optimizing for the wrong variable. I was trying to maximize money when I should have been maximizing years. That's the reframe. Retirement isn't about having enough money to stop working. It's about having enough health to enjoy the time you've bought. Seventh sign, you're not working toward anything anymore. This is different from not caring about meetings. This is about ambition. When you were younger, you had goals. Make manager, break 6 figures, get the corner office, earn respect, build a reputation. Every year, there was some next level to unlock. But now, you look around and you realize there's no next level you actually want. You're not gunning for promotions. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not building towards some future, better version of your career. You're just here, and that's fine. Except it means the job has stopped being a progression and started being a holding pattern. And holding patterns are expensive because you're still paying full price in time and energy, but the return on investment has gone to 0. You're not getting growth. You're getting repetition. And repetition, for humans, is psychologically corrosive. There's research out of Cornell from 2017 that studied something called occupational purpose in older workers. They found that workers who reported having clear goals or growth opportunities at work had a 32% lower rate of early cognitive decline compared to workers who described their work as just a job I do until I can. Leave. Purpose protects your brain, but fake purpose, the kind you perform because you think you're supposed to care, does nothing. If you're going through the motions, you're getting all the stress of work with none of the cognitive benefits. You're paying full price for an empty product. Eighth sign, and this is the one that surprised me when I noticed it in myself. You've started being nicer to people at work, not in a fake way, in a genuine way. Because you've stopped seeing them as competitors or obstacles or people you need to impress. You're just nice because you're almost done and there's no strategic reason to be anything other than kind. This is what happens when the game is over, but you're still on the field. The stakes disappear. The tension dissolves. You can just be a person. I saw this with a woman I used to work with, Sharon. For years, she was sharp-elbowed in meetings, always positioning for credit, always defensive about her projects. Then, about 2 years before she retired, she just softened, started mentoring younger people with no expectation of return, started complimenting people's work, started saying no to projects without guilt. At her retirement party, someone said, "You've been so different the last couple years, so much more relaxed." And Sharon said, "Yeah, I stopped caring if any of this mattered." And she meant it as a good thing. She'd let go. And letting go made her better at her job, ironically, because she was no longer performing anxiety. She was just doing the work. If you've noticed this shift in yourself, That's your brain telling you the game is functionally over. You're in garbage time. Might as well be decent to people. Ninth sign. You've caught yourself calculating hourly wages. You're sitting in a meeting that's running long. It's 4:30 on a Friday, and in your head you're thinking, I make $70,000 a year. Divide that by 2,000 work hours. That's $35 an hour. This meeting has gone 90 minutes. So I just spent $52 of my life listening to Carl explain why we need new filing cabinets. This is a psychological phenomenon called temporal accounting. You've started measuring time not in hours, but in life cost. And once you start doing temporal accounting, you can't stop. Every commute becomes a calculation. Every late night becomes a calculation. Every Sunday evening, when you feel that dread about Monday, becomes a calculation. And the math never works out in favor of staying. Because here's the thing. When you convert salary back into hourly terms and then convert hours into life chunks, work starts to look like a terrible deal. You're trading irreplaceable pieces of your finite existence for money you probably don't even need anymore because you've been saving for 40 years. This is the mental shift that precedes almost every retirement decision. You stop thinking of salary as an annual number and start thinking of it as a cost per hour of your remaining life. And suddenly, the price is too high. 10th sign, and this is the one that should make you stop and really think. You've started planning your retirement life in detail, not vague I'll travel or I'll relax fantasies. Specific plans. You know what you're going to do with your mornings. You've researched hobbies. You've thought about part-time work or volunteering. You've mentally mapped out a week, a month, a year of retired life, and it feels more real than your current work life. This is the final psychological domino. Because it means you've already made the decision. You just haven't executed it yet. Your identity has already shifted. You're no longer a worker who daydreams about retirement. You're a retired person who's temporarily still going to work. And that liminal space where you're mentally checked out but physically still showing up is the most expensive place to be. Because you're getting none of the benefits of work, purpose, challenge, growth, and none of the benefits of retirement, freedom, rest, autonomy. You're paying the cost of both and getting the rewards of neither. Let me give you a concrete example to make this real. I know a couple, Bill and Linda. Bill worked in municipal management. Linda was a nurse. They were both 63. Combined income of $130,000 a year. Between them, they had pensions that would pay $75,000 annually. They had $320,000 in retirement accounts. House paid off. No debt. They ran the numbers. They could retire comfortably. But Bill wanted to work 2 more years to get his pension to $82,000 instead of $75,000. Made sense on paper. $7,000 a year more for life, that's a good return. But here's what actually happened. Bill had 8 out of 10 signs I just described. He hated Mondays. He checked out mentally. He was running retirement calculations constantly. His back hurt every day. Meanwhile, Linda had already retired and was calling him every afternoon asking when he'd be home. 2 years turned into a prison sentence, and halfway through, Bill told me, I'm making $7,000 more per year, but I'm spending $15,000 a year more on stress, doctor visits, and blood pressure medication. And I haven't had a real conversation with my wife in 6 months because I'm too tired when I get home. He retired 4 months later, didn't wait for the full 2 years. And you know what he said? I should have left the day Linda did. The extra money wasn't worth the life cost. But he couldn't see it until he was in the middle of paying it. Now you're probably thinking, okay, but I need to be financially secure. I can't just quit because I'm tired. And you're right, but here's what you're missing. Most people dramatically overestimate how much money they need in retirement and dramatically underestimate how expensive it is to keep working. On the money side, studies show that most retirees spend 20 to 30% less than they thought they would. You're not commuting. You're not buying work clothes. You're not eating out for lunch every day. You're not stress spending on weekends to recover from the work week. Your actual cost of living drops. But more importantly, your idea of what you need changes. You stop trying to keep up appearances. You stop optimizing for status. You start optimizing for time, and time is cheap. A morning walk costs nothing. Reading costs nothing. Cooking a good meal costs less than eating out. The expensive life you think you need to fund, that's your current life. your work life. The retirement life is cheaper than you think. On the other side, the cost of continuing to work is almost always underpriced. You're factoring in salary, but you're not factoring in health deterioration. You're not factoring in the opportunity cost of missing years with grandkids or aging parents. You're not factoring in the psychological erosion of spending another 1,000 days doing something you've stopped believing in. Those costs are real. They're just invisible on a spreadsheet. So here are 3 actual takeaways, not generic advice. First, audit the subscription. Sit down and make 2 lists. One list is everything you get from work right now, not what you used to get, what you're actually getting today. Be honest. Second list is what it's costing you, not just hours, but health, relationships, mental energy. If the costs outweigh the benefits, the subscription is bad and you should cancel it. Second takeaway, reverse engineer your retirement number. Most people calculate forward. They say, I need $2 million to retire safely. Wrong approach. Calculate backward. What do you actually spend per month right now? Subtract work-related expenses. Multiply by 12. That's your annual need. Now look at your income sources. Pension, Social Security, dividends, whatever. If your passive income covers 80% of your need, you're not 10 years away from retirement. You're one small adjustment away. Downsize the house. Move to a cheaper state. Pick up a low-stress part-time gig. You're closer than you think. Third takeaway, stop waiting for perfect timing. There's no magic moment where everything aligns and retirement feels obvious. If you're waiting for clarity, you'll wait forever. The decision to retire is like the decision to have kids or get married. You'll never feel completely ready. You just reach a point where the cost of not doing it exceeds the risk of doing it. If you've got 6 or more of the signs I described, you're past that point. The risk now is staying, not leaving. Retirement isn't a finish line. It's a subscription cancellation. And the only person who benefits from you keeping that subscription active when you've stopped using the service is your employer. Cancel it.